I'd like to talk about the smart meters in our country and here in Australia. These smart meters were rolled out when I actually qualified and started working in this industry in around 2006, where Victoria was the first state where it was mandatory and started rolling out the smart meters. It's an awfully controversial field. Smart meters are certainly not unique to Australia. They're in many parts of the world and controversial all around the world. So they've been around a long time. Now in Victoria they're completely rolled out. There is actually, this may change, but as of here in 2021, Victoria is the only state where it is absolutely mandatory. You can actually, in other states, and many people don't know this, but you can request that a smart meter not be installed, and you can pay for a quarterly reading or for someone to come out as often as they need to in that state and take readings manually, as they always have done, and you just have to pay extra for that. But here in Victoria, the way they've been rolled out and the type of meters they use, that is not an option, unfortunately. If there is one there, it will not be removed. You'll find it extremely difficult to do so. There's always exceptions to the rule. Anyway, I've dedicated a special segment to smart meters because in my experience, I've found that they have been an area of significant concern. It is a very confusing field, plagued with all sorts of information, misinformation, if you will, sometimes not misinformation, but not giving what I think is the right information that should be given. When looking at the fields associated with electrical meters, you will find that there are different fields. One is the magnetic flux density, which is applicable to any meter, not necessarily a smart meter, and it drops very significantly with distance. So as you move further away from the source, and it drops quickly by the inverse square rule, all that means is if you move 2 meters away, it'll be 4 times less, but if you just move 3 meters away, it'll be 9 times less. So every little bit of distance you move further away from that meter, the field drops significantly. And if it's in a bedroom or study or any indoor area, we've found that if you're just a few meters away from the meter, that it's okay in terms of it will drop to its background level. The only concern we have is when that meter is on the wall, and on the internal wall from where that meter is, we have a bed head or we have a couch, an area where you spend significant amounts of time, particularly the bedrooms. So older homes often have bedrooms up the front of the property, and that's where the meter box is, and that's our concern, that the bed heads are put up against that wall. Then we do have a concern. That's the magnetic flux density, easy to move away, very difficult to shield, but easy to move away from it. However, what I have found to be causing a lot of issues when the smart meters were introduced is the wireless transmission that occurs. Now here you will find information and be told that basically there is a wireless transmission that happens maybe a few times a day, is the equivalent of the power level of a text, and is therefore not a problem at all. However, when we take readings, we find that there is a pulse that occurs. It varies, but around every 20-30 seconds, very regular intervals within a minute or two, but anything from 20-30 seconds up to a number of minutes, this pulse occurs where there is a much more elevated pulse, and therefore EMR or EME exposure level, and then goes down to nothing, and then very high again, and then nothing, and very high again. And this, in my personal opinion, is causing some problems. The most common symptoms I've found is that people, when it's behind their bedhead, I've found that there is very disturbed sleep. Very surface sleep. It almost feels like you haven't slept at all because it's so surface, coming in and out of your sleep. That is a problem, and one that is a real issue, and therefore you get fatigue, therefore you get issues with focus and clarity of thought and concentration levels, but that you can often put down to a lack of sleep, which is what it's disturbing your sleep. However, there is another interesting symptom that is quite unique to smart meters, and that is that it causes anxiety, in my opinion, and what I've found. If I walk into a house and I see this smart meter on the back of a child's bed, or in a child's bedroom, even if it's not right behind their bed head, remember this wireless pulse doesn't drop as quickly as the magnetic flux density. It also drops with distance, certainly, but you don't have to be up against the bedhead wall to be affected by it. You can be on another wall in that room, the bedhead, and still be significantly affected. In fact, an adjacent room can also be affected. So it's a little bit different to just moving 2 meters away in relation to the magnetic flux density. This wireless transmission is an issue. So what I've found is the anxiousness that is caused, whether you're an adult or whether you're a child. But when I get into a child's bedroom, I can tell you that that child will often, especially if they're much younger, will get up at night and feel an enormous level of anxiety that they have had a very vivid nightmare and have ongoing nightmares. It's never a vivid dream, a nice dream. It's always related to anxiety and anxiousness. And they often get up and jump into their parents' beds and say they're having a nightmare and having issues. And this for me is a symptom that I've seen repeated over and over again. And when I've said just experiment, take the child, put them in another room that I've seen isn't affected by the smart meter, is a few doors down or on the other side of the house, there certainly is a significant difference straight away, and that level of anxiety and bad sleep, if all other things are equal, just simply doesn't occur. And the change is immediate. It doesn't take time. It's that very night. So this is something I've found very interesting, quite disturbing, but this is why I've put a separate segment together for this. When we look at houses on their own and we're designing from scratch, we say, please, just put the meter off the house. You're quite legally allowed to do so. And so the meter often goes where the post box is. That's where we'll put it, and you can run your underground cable, and you can certainly have your switchboard there on the house, but I certainly wouldn't want the meter on the house if at all possible. Very difficult and expensive to move it afterwards. It's possible to move the meter, but it's a more costly and difficult thing to go through. But if you're building from scratch, you can just put it out on the street. Very nice access if ever need be for the electrical company. You don't have to have it onto your house. There's a nice signal because it's out on the street. It's not on the house, and therefore issues with signals in some areas and so on. So in my opinion, benefits everyone, and what should be standard, but unfortunately isn't standard. Often when you'll find units, townhouses and so on, you will find one unit that will have 6, 7, 8, 4, however many smart meters for however many units there are. One poor unit cops it all. And this for me is a massive issue. But really these meters should just be off buildings and not on the back of where you are sitting and spending your time on a couch or a bed in any way or form. Anyway, that's my opinion. What I'll do is run through a couple of options when the smart meter is already installed and what can we do. So if you look here, this bit of footage, you'll see that's what your meter box looks like, in which the smart meter is housed. And in this particular example, you'll see that this is put in our project. You'll see that this is put actually onto a study wall. So it's not a bedroom in the front there, but it's at the front of the house, and that is a study. The study desk is not up against that wall, but it is in that study. And I'd like to show you that if you look at a photo and look at this photo of what the study looks like, it's the wall with the nice big wallpaper with the elephants on it, and the wall looks so pretty. and lovely, and you'd think, well, there's no problem at all in this particular room, and what a lovely wall. But what I want to show you is that let's strip that wall before it all went up, before the reno, and just consider for a moment that many beds are up against the meter box. This is what the meter box looks like before the plasterboard wall goes up and looks pretty. You can see all of the cabling for your entire house is coming out from that meter box. Mains cabling is coming up from underneath. You can see the mains cable coming in the bottom there, and then all of your electrical circuits go out from the top. All your power circuits, all your electrical, everything comes through there, and you push your bed right up against that, and the only thing between you and all of those electrical fields, magnetic flux densities, electric field voltages, it all is up against your bed head. And for me, that's a problem, or a couch, whatever is up against there. There should not be any areas where you spend time up against that wall. Just take a look at that photo and please remember it and say, no, I don't want to sit on a couch or be in a bed up against that. Please be mindful of that. Don't just look at the photo from the outside and see a meter box and go, oh, that's fine, and look at a plasterboard wall on the inside. Know that this is what's going out, and this is not a lot of circuits, but this is all the cabling that comes out of that meter box. So that's what you will see when you break it down, and it's not something that human beings should be sleeping up against, in my opinion. And I've noticed enormous differences. Very short term, there are issues that what I've spoken about because of the smart meter and levels of anxiety and disturbed sleep and so on. But in the long term, the magnetic flux density and the magnetic field, that is a significant problem and can give rise to much more serious health effects. So I have noticed that there have been issues with long-term exposure when it comes to the magnetic field or the magnetic flux density in relation to these meter boxes. It's just not something that you should be sleeping up against. I know I keep repeating myself, but please, I want this to sink in. Don't sleep behind a meter box for a long period of time. Long-term exposure used to be termed 10 years plus. Suddenly that was halved. Long-term exposure is now regarded as 5 years plus. You should not be sleeping up against that for any amount of years, all right? You've got to sleep up against it for a night or two or a week or a month or whatever it might be, but long-term exposure, in my opinion, be very mindful of that. So this is what it looks like. You open, most people will know, you open up your meter box. This is what the smart meter looks like. There are different smart meters with different providers. Now I know that if you have any issues with a smart meter, anything you want to discuss with a smart meter, it's not really your retailer, electrical retailer that you need to call. You need to call the wholesaler. The name of your electrical wholesaler and the power company will be on that meter. So whether it is PowerCore or Gemini or United Energy, or whatever it might be here in Australia, that's who you need to call. And there will often be a metering manager who's in charge of these meters. That's who you need to speak to. Getting through to call centers and so on will just get some generated brochure to you saying that everything's fine and there are no issues and you're within Australian standard. You're certainly within Australian standards. You will never exceed an Australian exposure standard. Of that you can rest assured. The issue and the controversy is with that standard. And is it sufficient? And that's another story. As building biologists, we do not regard your exposure level as okay when you're sleeping up against meter boxes. So what can we do about it? Well, this is one option I want to talk you through. If you look at the next photo, you'll see I had the electrical company come out, our wholesaler. There's a metering manager who has been very kind, very giving of their time and very understanding. Understanding in that saying that some people do have an issue or are sensitized and therefore they are willing to do some things. But obviously in general, the electrical companies will always say that there is absolutely nothing wrong with the smart meters, and they're all fine. But at least they are offering some solutions which we need to be very thankful for. It is very difficult to get these solutions out with some companies. They are not interested, but you need to persevere. And certainly we deal with a lot of integrative doctors who write letters for people who are really sensitized and cannot be behind these, even though I believe no individual should be sensitized or not. So this is what we call a low profile antenna. So there is an option where you can have your antenna that is transmitting from the smart meter itself disconnected and use an external antenna. Now the power company does do this in some areas when they're not getting a very good signal. They will want to put an antenna on the outside of the meter box. That often happens because the meter box is metal. It struggles to get out of metal. There are some small slits in the front of a meter box panel, and that's where the signal often will best get out of. But otherwise you have caged it within a metal box there. So they don't get a good enough signal, and they will put something like this, a low profile antenna, up on the top of your box. They also have what they call a door mount antenna, which they'll put on the front of your door, front door of the meter box. This is sometimes a very good option. If you disconnect the antenna and put a door mount antenna on the front door of your meter box, and there is openness, nothing to reflect back to your building on in front of that door, it's a good option because you've taken that signal out of the metal box, put it onto the front door, and the transmission takes place going forwards. And if that's all an open area, then you have now put more metal and therefore more shielding between you and your indoor environment. You can also ask them, as it's now on the outside, to turn down the power transmission level. That is another thing you can do, where you can ask the power company to reduce the power transmission level, and that's the level at which this wireless transmission takes place, and they can usually do that remotely. So that is something we've done on many occasions, and after testing I found makes quite a significant difference. But certainly consider that door mount antenna. It can make it worse if you're taking something out of that metal box, like the antenna, putting it on the front door of your meter box, and then there's a ColorBond fence in front of that. It will simply reflect back, and you'll be more affected than otherwise would have. So just be mindful. You need to get a building biologist to have a look at your very specific setup and where your meter is and what its surroundings are, because it gets absorbed and reflects off a number of different materials. It's not a one solution for everyone. It's quite unique to your situation. So this is a low profile antenna which you can put on top of your meter box. I wouldn't do that. I'm just showing you what it looks like, or a door mount antenna. What we tried here on this particular site is, if you look at this next picture, we have decided to run a conduit up that wall from the meter box and run it across to the left past that gutter, and have a high profile antenna put on the corner of the building. Now I'll show you just the process. Basically, the power company drilled a hole in the corner of that meter box. This was all done by the power company. Please, they are the only ones who can do this. Not an electrician, not yourself, not anyone else, only the electrical wholesaler. So they drilled a hole in the top of the meter box there, as you can see. Then they ran a conduit up, and on the top there by the gutter, you can see now a high profile antenna. So it looks like a nice big long black high profile antenna, as opposed to a little short stubby low profile antenna. You can see how it was all run. This conduit, that's now run up the wall and run across to the corner of the house from the meter box. And there you can see internally how they now will disconnect the antenna from the meter, and they've run this external antenna, drilled out the back there, run it up the meter box to out where you can see it. Then what they do is they go into their sort of computer network on site, and they program the smart meter to not use the internal antenna, that's the one that's in the smart meter, but rather the now newly fitted external high-profile antenna. Now, the reason why we put it outside, because we thought we've got a colour bond roof. Now, if you have a tiled roof, it's not going to help much. However, with every bit of distance you move that antenna transmission source from yourself, the better it is. So if you can move it further away, it will drop off with distance. And if you can reduce the power transmission level on top of that, now that it has a much better signal and is out in the open, reduce the power transmission level so that the signal is still going to the electrical company, but it's not just on this default 30 dBm power setting, which is just not necessary. I've seen it reduce to 28, 26 dBm, or even as low as 10 dBm. So the power company, they are the ones who will look at it. They will see when they're getting a good signal, to what setting they can lower it to, where they're still getting a good signal, but the power level is much lower at your property. That's the goal. That's what we're trying to achieve here. So there you can see the power company on the wheelie bin, just got their laptop and seeing what's they're programming it to please use the high profile antenna and not the internal antenna. You can try and shield against the wireless transmissions in relation to the smart meter, but please note that this is not an easy thing to do and can change a number of your electrical issues in the property. So the electroclimate can change significantly depending on what you're reflecting things off. For example, I see that you can often buy what's called a Faraday cage for the smart meter. I've tested these and have found them to be quite useless, in all honesty. When you're putting a cage onto the meter, as you open the meter door box and fit this cage onto the front of that meter, you're shielding to a degree some of, perhaps you're shielding, but only to a degree, some of the electromagnetic energy coming from the front of the meter, but certainly nothing to do with what's going inside your property and into the indoor environment. You need to shield on the other side of that, and that's why if we're shielding, we'll often shield on the internal wall, not fitting a cage over the meter on the outside. It just doesn't make any sense. So it's very important that you get a professional, a building biologist who has experience in this field, to please consult with them and find out what type of shielding you should apply, and to do appropriate testing to ensure that that is all done correctly. There are paints you can get that can also shield many different kinds. Some are no good, some are good, but just realize that the electrical environment will change. Remember that if you're shielding with a paint, that you'll be painting this onto a surface, you will be earthing that paint, and therefore it will be very attractive to electricity in general. And this creates a lot of confusion, because yes, it will, to a degree, it will stop the electromagnetic energy from coming into your indoor environment. But then there are electrical fields which will also be attracted to this wall that is now earthed, because electricity always wants to earth itself. So how is that going to affect you? Because where will these electrical fields be coming from? They could be in cabling under your bed, they could be in the ceiling above your bed, and they don't just travel on that cable. There'll be an electrical field that can sometimes go through your body in order to get there. And this has been tested enormously, especially with earthing blankets, for example. Again, something that needs to be earthed, and earthing blankets can be fantastic, and certainly grounding yourself and earthing yourself is a fantastic thing to do, but it's not always that simple. The earth is debatably not that great anymore. There's so much current and so much earthing taking place that, are you truly earthing when you put a stake in the ground? A lot of the time you are, and sometimes you're not. And again, if you have an earthing mat that you're on top of, if there are electrical fields attracted to that, they can come through you. The Germans have done an enormous amount of experiments and testing in relation to this. And it is a complex and difficult field to understand. So please don't jump in and just buy products and apply shielding and so on, because it's a lot more complicated than you think. That's why as building biologists and myself personally, I look at just disconnecting the antenna and moving it a distance. Everyone will agree that that will have an effect. So before you buy any product, just please consult a building biologist first. In this particular project, as I've shown you, we did put the external antenna on the outside, on the corner, and actually found that it increased the exposure level, to our surprise. Because technically with that high profile antenna, the transmission should be happening from the top of that high profile antenna, and therefore it should reflect off the color bond roof, and it's moved slightly further away than what it was. So that increased distance and moving further away should be better. But actually we found that if they were just simply, we changed it back to the internal antenna, or the antenna connected to the smart meter itself, and got them to reduce the power transmission level from 30 dBm, went down to approximately 26 or so dBm, and that made a significant difference, a much bigger difference than putting on the outside. However, we have done a number of different properties, and we have found that moving the antenna as far as possible away from where you are spending time, and then powering down the transmission level has made it undetectable when we're measuring it. So this just goes to show that it is difficult to know what that transmission is going to be reflecting off, because in this particular project there was a wall fairly close, which we didn't think would be an issue, but obviously is an issue. And therefore only if you take that antenna and move it a significant difference or distance away will it make a significant difference. So be very mindful that these are things that are available: reducing the power transmission level, moving the antenna a greater distance away from where you spend time. Those are two things that are very good. Shielding is the absolute last resort. It really is. And ideally smart meters should be out on the street level, next to the post box, completely away from the building, and everyone's happy. That is my opinion on smart meters and what I've found works and doesn't work. So I hope that has given you enough information for you to make your own decisions, or consult a building biologist and get it right.